welcome to a new episode of our program about design. This is your host, Maria Cernat, and with me, as usual, is graphic designer Frank Bianc, our friend. Thanks for being here with us.
Hello, it's always nice to be with you.
So the seventh episode of the history of design, we tried to walk you through a century of graphic design following the textbook of Jeremy Ashley and other textbooks important in the history of graphic design. Now we are going to discuss a very interesting chapter. We discussed pop art, and we discussed how pop art became a predecessor for postmodernism. And now we are going to discuss late modernism and postmodernism. The last and past 30 years or even more were influenced a lot in the history of graphic design by these two currents, late modernism and postmodernism. They were also ideological choices, if I may say so. And you will discover that opting for a simple font like Helvetica may prove to be like opting for the language of capitalism or of corporations, or this is how some graphic designers see it. Now, late modernism continued and continued with the ideas of universal language, establishing a universal language and a neutral language that would focus on functionality, efficiency, and on the idea that legibility is at the same time communication. And while some graphic designers may find this very problematic because they find it boring, some other graphic designers stick to the Swiss typography, stick to the Helvetica typeface and other fonts that were developed during the modern era. Now, postmodernism was a controversial art, but it was not through opposition, but through irony, subtext, ironic references, and intentional pastiche that the postmodern designers and artists in general tried to challenge the status quo. Now, modernism is usually associated with the industrial boom, with the 50s, with the beginning of the century and the three currents we discussed, like constructivism, the Bauhaus in Germany, with the futurism in Italy, Filippo Marinetti. We discussed that in our second lecture on the history of design. And it is also related to the language of corporation because as we discussed some lectures ago, when modernism touched the American soil, it became the status quo, and it became a tool for maintaining the status quo and the social relations, not of challenging the status quo, because it became the language of advertising and of corporations. Now, modernism was focused mainly on production. We can remember here how Marinetti was so enthusiastic about industry and how he said that he would gladly replace Nike of Samothrace, the famous Greek sculpture, with some sort of engine that was developed at the beginning of the century, meaning that art, in his opinion, should have been focused on the future and on industrial revolution. Now, postmodernism is associated basically with the consumer and the entertainment society. After this boom, after this enthusiasm that was related to the beginnings of the industrial era in the 20th century and the expansion of the capitalist mode of production, mainly in the United States and across the globe, postmodernism is associated to consumer culture. Now, here is a very, very interesting and subtle change that takes place, basically, because you see, modernism ends at a time where production itself ends in the Western part of the world. I don't know, Frank, if you ever consider that, but this is the way I see it. It is very interesting that postmodernism starts to become a thing and starts to become influential in arts, starting from architecture, poetry, and even philosophy, if you think of Lyotard postmodern condition, and also of Gianni Vattimo and other important philosophers that wrote. And it became important at a time where globalization meant that the main companies, the American one, the ones that were producing mainly their consumer goods in the Western part of the world, moved their production facilities to the global South. And it is no coincidence that postmodernism and the era that we are living is focused more on advertising than on producing consumer goods. And it is so interesting that we cease to be producer of goods. We are only consumers. I don't know if you ever thought about this.
Well, yes and no. Of course, you are right that that the production went to the to the planet South, or also to the planet E, because China and India are big countries with very cheap production hands, like like people who are producing goods, but also without this aggressive and mass with aggressive and present in the mass media advertisement, the competition right now is extremely big. It's huge. Everybody wants to be on the stage. So the bigger the money, the bigger the publicity, the recognizability. It is very, very hard to get through right now. If you have some really nice idea, if you want, for example, to produce ecological shoes or ecological plastic, it is very hard right now to get through all of these, how to express myself, companies which are right now like fortified on the main stage of the business of the
Yes,
global.
of course, because all the markets were consolidated during the 80s. There were a lot of regulations that were put in place by Roosevelt. And ever since then, the business community tried to deregulate. And finally, when in the 80s Ronald Reagan came to power, they finally got their man and they finally got what they wanted. And just to give you an example for the media and how the media consolidation is evolving, in the 80s 90% of the media market in the United States was owned by 53 corporations, and now it is less than, I think it is 6 corporations.
You're right.
Okay, so this happened everywhere, and this is why it is so important. And also in advertising, think of J. Walter Thompson, think of Leo Burnett, think of David Ogilvy and others that founded important advertising companies that were swallowed, in this process of mergers, because mergers were prevented by the antitrust regulations. And once Reagan came into power and just opened the gates for that to be possible, you got a consolidation, meaning that you get less and less companies that become even more powerful by the day. So you get less companies, but more power, more financial power. As we moved from a society of producers and consumers to a society of basically consumers, postmodernism comes into place, and it basically, I would say, it is a parasitic form of art. You know what I say that? Because it uses symbols, it uses basically what was already created and just changes its meaning. You know, everything is in postmodernism is this form of parasitic. I'm not saying this to undermine the efforts of the artist or to smear someone or to downplay the artistic movement. But I was saying only to reflect the idea that what is the quintessential of postmodernism is that it uses well-established symbols and well-established work of art to and also to make fun of those arts, to reflect them in a different manner, to change their meanings, and so on and so forth. So elements of postmodernism were present in pop art, in symbolism, but postmodernism was the thing that basically took those, instincts, so to speak, and those initiatives and developed them into a full-blown current and artistic perspective. Now, I mentioned here two important books that are fundamental for the emergence of postmodernism, Learning from Las Vegas, and The Language of Postmodern Architecture. That is very, very important because for the first time, or not for the first time, but for the first time in this context, architecture, it's seen as a language, a way of communicating, and it is actually in the architecture that postmodernism in the history of arts became very much used and present. Now, Jeremy Ainslie, in his chapter that I am discussing here, presents 11 important representatives, designers group for the period of the 80s. The first one, because it is very interesting that they are a collective of designers and they are the ones that actually influenced a lot the field of design. The pentagram is the first one. Being five, they decided on that name, pentagram. And they were very much focused on producing high quality forms of designs. This is why in 1987, for instance, they were called by the famous publication, the Financial Times, the Rolls-Royce of design. And this is a big a collective of designers in terms of their financial success, because in 2000, in addition to their London office, they opened branches in New York, San Francisco, Texas, and they have 19 partners. So this is a very big, so to speak, design company. Their style is clear, playful, with a note of humor. Now, they worked for very important, as you may see here, for very important clients coming from the corporation world or the artistic world, because they worked for Penguin Books, for Pet Shop Boys, for The Guardian, for Reuters, or IBM. And they also sponsored cultural events offering awards in design. Now, this chapter devoted to postmodernism is very much influenced by what happened in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, there were important designers. We haven't discussed much of what happened in the Netherlands, but this particular chapter in the history of design was very much influenced by what happened in Netherlands. And I don't know if you knew this particular designer. He's kind of famous, and he was interviewed during a documentary, the so-called Helvetica documentary, a very interesting one that touches upon the dominance of the Helvetica and the sans serif typefaces, but especially Helvetica during the second half of the 20th century. And he is Will Kruval. He is a very refined designer that is very much prone to accept modernism. Because what we will see here is some sort of a tension. I would not call it a full-blown conflict, even though it amounted to that on several occasions, but a tension between those who are more prone to accept modernism, that is legibility, functionalism, efficiency, focusing on the message, and basically the typefaces and the images as a tool of conveying the message and not as a means and in itself, you know. And he was very influential. I watched this documentary and there was this collective of young designers saying, look, I grew up in Rotterdam. He designed the Dutch postal materials that for the telecommunication service, for transportation, for almost everything that surrounded them. Will Kruval basically influenced the visual vocabulary of the authorities in Netherlands. As I told you, he designed things that were present in the public sphere all over the place. And also, he was very much involved in this acceptance, as I told you, of modernism and especially of the Helvetica typeface. Because as I saw from the documentary, this typeface, even though it seems like, what, you are going to fight for a font? I mean, come on. But this is very important for designers, first of all, and second of all, it is also an ideological, option. It is not merely just these designers crazy fights over details that no other normal human being would see.
Well, it is very
What?
important.
Oh, so you see it.
Yes, of course. Do you remember this film which is called Avatar?
Yes, I do.
And the font in the title is very, how should I say, primitive. It's not something like, for example, if you have this Star Wars, Star Trek, which has special designs for the, yeah. And the font in the Avatar is called Papyrus. It is very simple. And actually, there is a very nice sketch. This is a very, very not typical font for this type of, science fiction movie, because it looks old Egyptian, like papyrus. When you say papyrus, it looks like old Egyptian. Yeah, this is it. You see?
Exactly. Well,
So
they
there is
wanted
this.
to convey the message that it is nature, and they wanted to
Yeah,
go
but
back.
yes. But it's a simple font. I mean, like not a type for a title. And actually, there was this sketch of I don't know. Do you know Saturday Night Live?
This man, this professional graphic designer, was it laziness? Was it cruelty?
Okay, where else do you even see this font?
So this is it. Like when you are a designer, and for example, something is not fit to your mind, you will see it everywhere. So yeah.
Well, yes, I think this is the case. So, but with Helvetica, it's something else because, as I told you, it's also an ideological, perspective, and we will see why. Because he was, and he actually said that on numerous occasions in his articles and also in this interview that I saw in this documentary, that he was all for legibility, for efficiency, for clarity. He didn't like the way the postmodern designers used many fonts and they explored with it. And he didn't like what happened, and he said that. What it is interesting is that in 1967 he developed his own graphic alphabet of the as an extension of the Swiss printing. Um, this is a form of printing developed in Switzerland that is based on clarity, order, and understanding, and basically also Helvetica, that is the result of the collaboration between Edward Hoffman and Max Miedinger. Max Miedinger actually designed that, but it was under the guidance of Edward Hoffman that was produced. And he very much liked that. Now, in complete opposition is Jan von Thorn, a very interesting graphic designer that was called the Bertolt Brecht of design. Now, why Bertolt Brecht? Because Brecht was a very critical theater director and theater author of numerous theater plays. And he was basically challenging all the time the power relations and the status quo. And he was a very critical and not at all obedient artist. And they say, the historians of graphic designs, or at least this is the opinion of Jeremy Ainslie, but I find it on numerous other articles, is that Jan von Thorn is, by his critical stance, again, and his ideas on society and power relations, is the Bertolt Brecht of graphic design. Now, what is also very interesting here, and you don't find this very often, especially in the world of design, when people tend to avoid each other, and even if they don't like something, they don't say it out loud because, you know, it's not good for business. But he actually had a very important intellectual exchange exactly with this person, Wim Kruwel, because he very much challenged the idea of the neutrality of the design of the designer. He said that the designer has an agenda. The idea that you can be neutral is political in itself, because you cannot escape ideology just by pretending that you're not ideological, you know, and that art is not ideological because you don't want to and you pretend to be neutral. There is no such thing. You always have an agenda, whether you like it or not. And I have to tell the students that this is also very important here in Romania, and also is important in theater and other places where we discuss art. Because in Romania, Ceausescu and the other, you know, people that were in charge before 1989 wanted to force basically and shove down the throats of the artists the idea that they have to contribute, no matter what, to the forming of the social class conscience and to the progress of society. And you know, in art, when you start forcing people to do something, even if this is for the good of the society, things don't go well. And things start to, you know, they become very reluctant in obeying, you know. And we even had what is called in theater some people that were responsible with the censorship. I don't know if you have that in Bulgaria or in Poland, but here we had a representative from the Communist Political Party that had to say, if your theater play, your poetry, your painting, your design is in line with the party line or not.
Right now, we do have the same thing in Poland.
Oh, please tell me about it.
Yes, because you know, right now we do have this.
Fundamentalists just preserve the old ways.
Right now, we do have exactly the Stalinist, idea in the Polish national television, which is owned. I mean, like owned. It's not owned, but you know, which is directed by the government party, which is right now
Peace, право и справедливость, which means order and justice.
Law and justice. Mm-hmm.
Law and justice, yes, 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 which is absurd because, you know, there is no order and there is no law in this, what they do. They're twisting the reality. They are lying, and this is not journalism, because this is a lie, what they do right now. And
Yes,
there is
but
nothing that
I think they have to stay there because they have to do their jobs. If they don't do it, they will get fired, because this is the
you
way
know.
authoritarian governments tend to impose the thing. Now, but I want to say that in Romania, that created a huge backlash. And after 1989, the idea that art is political just made people crazy. They don't accept this idea that it is actually very simple, that you cannot have a neutral point of view. Nobody is neutral and completely independent. And Jan von Thorn basically challenged this idea that the designer is neutral, that he doesn't have an agenda, that he doesn't produce meaning, that he reflects reality. It is not producing meaning. And he very much, he engaged, as I told you, with Wim Kruval. They had their first clash in a public debate, and then they continued because Jan von Thorn continued to challenge the status quo. He had very interesting ideas, like, you know, creating very interesting designs. For instance, he created some design where you had to destroy the thing to get to the message, and another one where the cover was furry. You know, he was extremely creative, and Wim Kruver took it upon himself to tell him, oh, this is not right. You should have done it this way, because this is not the way to do design. You know, he felt like he was the protector of the right way to do design, and the other one kept challenging him. So basically, Jan von Torp is also very important because he also challenges the way designers use their talents to obey to corporations' interests and to the power interests, and how they are embedded, you know, and helping this system of oppression that we have, and they are not challenging anything. So basically, they support the status quo. Now, basically, another designer that was not so much, you know, into this again, because as I told you, this is a very interesting chapter where a lot of the designers were Dutch. Gerd Dunbar, he created the famous Studio Dunbar, where he wanted to have some sort of controlled chaos. I mean, he had a line, but he had a lot of people that came, and he allowed them to experiment and to he had this idea that he had to give up the rigid functionalism and to allow sensitivity and creativity to appear in design. And he basically wanted to experiment also with design, and to give up this idea that the design has to be focused, you know, on that purpose, and that purpose of conveying the message, and that's it. So he basically was not involved, so to speak, in this. Designer has a very clear political stance. Well, he was Gerd Dunbar was more pragmatic, and he founded this school of designers. And this is very important also because basically it was an eclectic style where anything was, you know, possible. And it is a collective of designers that was formed in the 80s, and they wanted to challenge the uniformity of modernist design, because of course you have efficiency and you have legibility, but for some designers that was excruciating boring. So they wanted to have something else in the designs, and there is no wonder and there is no surprise if I tell you that most of their clients came from the artistic arena, because in the artistic area, because they wanted to do something else. And it will come as no surprise that they were very close to bankruptcy at some point, because it is very difficult to experiment and to do design on an empty stomach, as you probably know so well, that it's so difficult to challenge the status quo when you have to fight for a living and to make a living. But a contract with Warner Bros. Saved them from this bankruptcy, as well as a merger with a packaging company. Now, it is my pleasure to present you this particular person and this designer. I have to tell you that unfortunately, still, the designer world is dominated by white males. I saw it in the documentary. I have to tell you that was only one designer, I think Paula Scher was presented there. And she was also very much politically engaged and had a very, social conscious, so to speak. But she was the only one. There were a lot of other important designers like Tobias Ferrer Jones, that in 2002 created the Gotham style, and Eric Spijkerman, that is so much against the Helvetica typeface, and Vir Kruver was there, and a lot of other designers, but not so many women. I don't know what that is. Why do you think that is?
Well, maybe it will sound too harsh to say this, from my mouth, because I know I could. I mean, like, I am for the equal role of women and men. Actually, I was working with women, a lot of women, also designers. But like, maybe there is this, the bosses, I mean, the people who are involved with owning the company, who are involved in the ownership, they are afraid that most of women will become pregnant, and then they will finish their job, or they will finish their careers, and they will like
So it's blatant misogyny, basically.
yeah, well, yes, this is a misogyny, but if you are involved with a child, it's not so very easy to work, right? Like statistically, yes, there are more white men. But if something have to be changed, it's not like should be changed like a tsunami wave. I think it should gradually be changed, because right now, for example, in in serials, we see only like Asian, black, which are everywhere, and women. We don't see white men anymore. Why? We do exist. I mean, like I'm a white man, like but if there is because what is the most important for me is the harmonious society, not like that this that till today were oppressed should be now the first.
No, but
No,
I'm not saying
it should
that.
go gradually. That's
Yes,
what
but
that's
there are what I was asking you. Even now, they are not focusing enough on women, and I think there are a lot of women designers. But unfortunately, I think even in this book,
Mhm.
I think there are less than 10% of women designers, and it's also a question of focus, at the same time. And this is why I am so pleased to present you
Of
the
course.
pioneer of digital design, because usually there are men who are thought to be pioneers, but Muriel Cooper was actually the one that first experimented with computers and design. And in 1952, she was appointed the head of the design department at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And she was the first to take design of academic books very seriously. And she was also at some point And for many years, she designed a lot of the book covers for the books that were printed at MIT Press. In 1958, she, not he, she benefited from a scholarship that allow her to visit the city of Milan, and at her return she created her own design studio, and basically the university was her main client. In 1968 she became a media director at MIT Press. Basically, from this position, she designed over 500 volumes, and they were published at that particular publishing house. And what is also very important is that in 1970s, as early as 1970, he co-founded the Visible Language Workshop. It was a media lab. She was teaching, teacher of interactive media design. And it was an experimental interactive workshop in music design, artificial intelligence, that preceded the impact of the technological revolution. And she actually went on saying that she believed that the line between professional designers and amateurs will become blurred once the digital revolution will take place. So she really was a visionary for her time. She also understood, and she also said that digital design will become the dominant form of design. So basically she
Right, right?
what?
He was right.
Yes, of course, but it is interesting that she was among the first to notice, and she was very intuitive in terms of the impact that this type of technology will have on design. So basically, Wolfgang Weingart, he represents the change from modern to postmodern because he basically reacted to Swiss printing, and he considered that his style, that style that is, you know, international, harmonious, is also sterile and anonymous. So he was very much connected to the climate of social protest specific to his generation. He first decided to train thoroughly in design when he came across this intellectual movements, and in 1968 he enrolled in the advanced course in graphic design, and he was asked to remain teaching, and as a teacher he influenced a lot of designers. He is very important for his critical stance on modernism, and because, as I told you, during that era you had people that reacted to modernism and people that wanted to protect the modernist ideas. Now, Dan Friedman is also this type of designer that he considered that the statements saying that the modernist current is dead are exaggerated. And in 1994, so not a very long time ago, he published this book, Radical Modernism, where he said that he is not so prone to abandon modernism. He wanted to abandon functionalism, the idea of using modernism to convey messages and the idea of efficiency, not the idea of creating an international, very legible, visual vocabulary. And he said that you can use also modernism as a form of social critique. He used his own apartment as an exhibition. I love this about, I would definitely, if I had the money, I would do that. I would decorate my house and use it as a museum. That's one of my ambitions. Maybe sometimes during my lifetime, I will be able to do that. I'm doing that for my friends, but I would like to, do it on a larger scale here in the small village of Dragomireș to have a museum in my house. But he also wanted to take important issues like climate change, AIDS, nuclear war, terrorism, ethnic cleansing, and another important issues that had social, meaning and understanding. Now, Bruno Monguzzi is also a Swiss modernist designer that was not attracted to postmodernism. He said, I find the world a little noisy, and I wish I could contribute a little to its quietness. So basically, he worked at another important group of designers that we discussed briefly here, that Studio Bogheri. He also studied Gestalt psychology, that is a form of psychology that starts from the idea that people perceive whole forms, not just disparate symbols, separate components. And he often used the famous wording that is so embedded in this form of psychology, that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. This prompted him to have a very analytical and very comprehensive style. And this made him join the Parisian company Visual Design Studio. And what is very important here, that he was among the ones that established the visual identity of the Orsay Museum that is organized in the former Orsay station, and it includes basically all the 19th century French Impressionist paintings. Now, I think it's the third Japanese designer that we are going to discuss. And finally, the last one is going to be Eiko Ishioka. That is a woman that designed a lot of the costumes in Hollywood, for instance, and you are going to love her, especially, she's one of my favorites. I mean, she designed such incredible things for especially for Snow White, for the latest movie that was done, the latest Hollywood production. Now, he combined the traditional style with the modernist elements, and together with Yusaku Kamemura, the one that designed the logos and the posters for the 1964 posters for the Olympic Games, founded the Nippon Center of Design in 1959. And this is very important because it gave designers and design, the social standing and status that they needed. And they also offered the Japanese public the opportunity to meet important designers like Herbert Bayer or Sol Bass. Now, as Yusaku Kamemura, he designed the posters for the Olympic Games in Sapporo. And now we come to the final, graphic designer, and I think it is, along with Jan von Thorn, is the one that I like most, and Muriel Cooper. From the designers that I presented today, Jamie Reed is by far one of my favorites, and I will say why exactly. Well, he used his art to challenge the status quo in the most inspired and creative way possible. He was basically associated initially with the punk movement, and he designed a lot of the covers for musical productions of the Sex Pistols. How do you say that? Band, okay. He became very attracted to punk as it was initially not a lifestyle, and at the beginning it was not something that you did with your hair, but something you did with your hair to protest something. It was, you know, buying and dressing a certain way was not an end in itself. It was a means to a higher end that was protesting, you know, the status quo. And it was very much attracted also to leftist politics. He graduated.
Punk is actually a leftist movement in the Western
But
countries
unfortunately, you
against the establishment, as you said.
of course, but you see, capitalism has this way of swallowing, you know, any protest and transform it into a lifestyle, into a consumer habit, into something that is useful for capitalism. Oh, you're protesting. Well, you look so nice. Let us use your looks to sell consumer goods for the other people to look like you know.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is this very perverse element where you buy certain things to look like you're protesting, you know. Basically, he's also responsible for very catchy titles and very provocative ones, like these stores welcome shoplifters, never trust a hippie, a brick will do the trick, save petrol, burn cars. And he adopted protest strategy that disfigure certain personalities, and Queen Elizabeth was one of his favorites. I mean, I also like him because also in Romania we have this, you know, very controversial habit of lionizing monarchy and of praising Queen Elizabeth and other people that are basically relying on PR. They serve no public service, they consume a lot of money. And in Romania, they are still looked upon as these great leaders, you know. And he is the one that basically made a lot of fun of Queen Elizabeth. Here he makes fun also of Vladimir Putin, who imprisoned this band, this rock band that sang at church in the one of the biggest cathedrals where Vladimir Putin went to pray, and they went there on occasion. They sang a song. He imprisoned them.
I can quote you the song of Sex Pistols, which is called "God Save the Queen." Can I?
Yes.
The only two lines. I mean, like the first goes like, "God save the Queen, the fascist regime. They made you moron, a potential H bomb." And then, "God save the Queen. She's not a human being, and there is no future, and England is dreaming." So you know, more or less the thing that you are saying about that.
Thanks so much for quoting this to me. Well, it was very much, you know, this idea of criticizing along the lines that were also used by Dadaists, the Dada movement, and by the Adbusters. And you can see here, you know, these decades only, shoplifters welcome Wall Street.
Yeah, cool. It is right. Like like this is the truth.
And this one, and also this one, save petrol, burn cars, bright future.
Yeah. Very
God
true.
save President Trump, God save us all. Well, that was the lecture for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you find it interesting, and also my discussion with Frank on the role of women in design. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all next week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you very much.